I forwarded everybody yesterday, and then Julie and Crystal, I just sent you it just right now. Kind of a cheat sheet for today, and then the dummy data set we're going to be working out of. So this lunch and learn is going to be a little bit different. I don't necessarily have a presentation to show y'all. It's going to be more of a hands-on working lunch and learn. I basically presented about 12 or so. There's a couple on this sheet that I forgot to include, but we'll add tips when cleaning data in Excel. Some of these are pretty simple. Some of these you might have used before. Some of these might be new to you. So what we're going to do is I'm going to explain each of these, show you how to do them in Excel. Then I'll give you a second to practice it yourself in Excel, and then we'll move on to the next one. And then at the end, you kind of have a quiz to where I'll give you a new data sheet, and you have to kind of apply everything we learned today and clean the data sheet. So yeah, that's how we're going to do it today. So let me show my screen. All right, so this is the dummy data sheet. We're going to be working out of the manager survey stats. So I obtained this data with the help of Andy. I forget what website we found it from, but it's a website that has thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dummy data sets that you can download and kind of manipulate and work with. This one was on manager survey stats. When Andy does his R cleaning and coding in a month, he'll be using the same data sheet, so you'll see it again. Also, when you pull up the cheat sheet, this is what you'll see. We're going to go in order. I've highlighted all kind of the tasks to do to make it a little bit more streamlined, but I'll explain each of them as we go. The couple other sheets you have down here, this VLOOKUP we'll use in a second. This transpose sheet we'll also use. This codebook sheet we'll also use. And then obviously the work on your own and your work on your own combined are stuff for later in the lunch and learn. So first things first, typically how we obtain data most of the time is we'll have it entered into REDCap, and then we'll export from REDCap into Excel or SPSS or whatever format you use. And then most of the time what needs to happen is some cleaning. When I was a student learning stats, my stats teacher told us that the stats part of stats is pretty easy. What I mean by that is the running of the ANOVAs, your t-test, that's the easy part. All you have to do is enter a couple buttons and it runs it. What is the most time consuming is the cleaning and the coding of your data. If you don't have a perfectly clean data set, you can't really run statistics well. So this time in the data cleaning process, I spend most of my time and I spend extra time just to make sure it's done perfectly right. Because if not, you're going to run into a ton of problems down the line. Okay, so first things first, if we're looking at our cheat sheet, the first thing we're going to do is fill in blanks. Now, this happens often to where you might have a participant not complete one of your data entries, or they just don't have data there. And what happens usually if you have blank data, it kind of messes with some of your statistics depending on what data you're running. So what I usually like to do is code it with an NA or unknown or whatever it may be. So if we're looking at our data sheet, first thing we're going to do is we're going to select a cell within our data set, doesn't matter where, and you're going to select Control A. That's going to highlight your entire data sheet. What we're going to do from here is press F5. That's going to bring up a dialog box to go to. What I do from here is then click Special, and then it's going to show me blanks. And if I click OK, it's going to take a second, depending on how big your data sheet is, and it's going to highlight all of my blanks I see within my data. Now, there's a couple things you can do with this. You can highlight them, you can fill them in, you can fill them one at a time. What's a real quick way to fill in all of them at one time? If I'm going to say enter N/A, instead of clicking enter, what I'm going to select is Control Enter. And what that's going to do is now fill in all of my data sheet with those blanks or with what I put. So again, if you wanted to see that again, we're going to go back. All of my blanks are filled. I'm going to select NA and then press Control Enter. And now we're all filled. So now within your own data sheet, if you'd like to take a second to follow those steps, by highlighting all of your blanks and then replacing them with, let's just go with NA for this class. So I'll give you all a second to do that. And if you have a question or issues at any point in the way, just let me know.
So I have a question. I did it just with control or like find replace.
Yes,
Do you
that
not
was when
recommend that, or was there a reason why? I was just curious if
nope.
there's a reason why.
So
Okay.
if you notice B under filling in blanks, find and replace is the alternate way. So you'll notice throughout this
Okay.
presentation, there's 1,000 different ways to do the same thing in Excel. So you might have a different way that works for you. I'm just showing you some options you have. So yes, find and replace is an option for sure. And that one is pretty simple. If we go back again, if I select my data sheet and I do Control F, I can now replace all blanks with NA. Same thing. So it's whatever preference you want to do. I like doing it the first way just so I can see where those blanks are to maybe see if there's any themes within the data. But
Okay.
the find and replace might be a little bit more streamlined if you know what you're looking at already.
Okay. I was just curious in case there was a reason why. I liked how you did it. I've never done it that way, but I was just curious if there was a reason. I want to make
Nope.
sure I'm not doing something bad, you know?
Nope. That's a perfect way to do it. Like I said, there's going to be a ton of different ways to do the same thing in Excel. So it's definitely not a one size fits all kind of solution.
Dave, I'm gonna ask a really dumb question. Do you know how to clear the clipboard? So when I press control, yeah, when I press Control A and then F5 to paste the clipboard, like when I press F5, it pastes something.
Paste something interesting. Well, yeah, well,
Oh, maybe yeah, copy a blank. That's what I'm doing.
that's essentially what F5 is paste, but I don't
Right.
know how necessarily to clear your clipboard. Does
No,
anybody?
you're right. Probably just control a blank thing.
Yeah, can you maybe just click a blank cell and copy it and then try to F5 that?
Yeah,
All right, giant caveat, and I'll stop asking questions then because I'm on a Mac. It's probably a Mac
Oh
problem.
yeah, that's another curveball that you might run into. Okay, moving on to our next one. This one's pretty simple to execute, but it is a common problem that you might see often when you're doing survey results or you're not necessarily the one entering the data. And that is having extra spaces either before or after your data. So I'm sure you've gone to code something, you've kind of want to go find something, let's say mail, for example, and you've typed in find mail, and you notice that some cells don't appear. And the reason being that there might be a space in front of it. If you look at column D here, you'll see we ask what industry do you work in, and all of these cells have extra spaces in the beginning, which, like I said, can become problematic when you're trying to code or when you're trying to find something using VLOOKUP or the if function, which we'll go over in a moment. So the easiest way to do this, there's a couple of ways, like I said, is to trim your data. And what you're going to do here is simply insert a new column. We're going to copy our same column heading, and all we're going to do is enter equals trim. We're going to open our parentheses, click on the cell we like to trim, close our parentheses, and let's press enter. As you can see here, this cell has now eliminated the extra spaces in front of accountant. Now, since I noticed this happens within all of my cells, what I can simply do is double click this little green box and it'll drag it all the way down my data sheet. So now all those extra spaces are eliminated. Now, when we use functions in Excel, what I usually do just to be safe, depending on what we're doing, if we're coding, it's a little bit different, but something like this, I usually like to copy and then paste my values. Just in case I move anything, I don't get that reference error that you typically see in Excel, which we might see that in a little bit here. But I just do it just to make sure if anything gets deleted, it's all there. But you'll see in a moment, it's not always the greatest idea to do that because we need to keep those formulas active when we're trying to find data. So another way we could also do this, if we notice that our cells consistently have a certain amount of spaces in between. So for example, I noticed that with our counting, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces in front of the word. And that's consistent here. The other solution, what you can do is you highlight your whole column and you click on data, and then you select text to columns. You can tell Excel to split the column based on a certain criteria. What I'm going to do is tell it fixed width. So after 6 characters in the cell, I want you to split it, aka getting rid of those extra spaces that we see. I can change this though to wherever I want in the cell. If you notice it somewhere else, but I'm going to keep it there for now and get rid of this one. If I click next and then finish, it's going to say there's already data here because I have my heading, which is fine. And you'll see now it's split it to where I've gotten rid of that extra space. All those extra spaces are still technically there in this cell, but we can just go ahead and delete that cell and now we're clean over here. Now, if you want to take a moment to trim, I'm sorry, yes, let's trim column D, either using the method text to columns or the trim method. And if you're confused about text to columns, I will explain that in a little bit more detail in a moment.
Can you explain to me why you're trimming the column again? Is it because there's an issue with recognizing spaces?
So it's an issue recognizing spaces. So for example,
So why wouldn't you just do control find replace space with nothing or underscore? Like, you know what I mean? Like why?
so if I do that, because it's not going to find the separate space within the cell, because there is still characters within the cell. And
Okay.
the issue is, if I wanted to do a VLOOKUP, for example, or an if function, or let's just do VLOOKUP. And I want to find the word retail in this table, and let's return 1 and then false. What's going to happen is it's never going to find retail because when I type in retail, there's no extra spaces in front. So that's the bigger issue that you're going to see within your data, is if those extra spaces are going to make it hard for you to find certain things when you're trying to code, but also could cause issues in SPSS.
Okay, yeah, because I was like, okay, well, I would have just did control find, got rid of the spaces and the commas, the, parentheses signs. Like I would have sort of then found that word and replaced it with a more simple word. Like I would have just like totally recoded that column in like a find replace way. And maybe that's too long and laborious, but I would have just taken out the stuff that I don't want.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and like I said, it really comes into issues when you're doing some of these later functions, like I'll describe.
Okay. All right.
But it isn't necessarily a end all be all if you're doing especially just text data or qualitative data. Okay, next we're going to go into converting text to numbers. So this is an Excel problem. I haven't experienced anything else, but typically in Excel, or what happens sometimes in Excel, especially when you're going from REDCap to Excel that I've experienced, is it'll sometimes recognize numbers as text. And you'll acknowledge that by these little green boxes in the top left corner of each of these cells. So basically what happens there is Excel is telling you, hey, I think this is a number in here, but the way it's entered is I see it as text. And the issue again is what we're going to have is if I'm looking for numbers or if I'm multiplying numbers, this won't register as a number, it'll register as text. So there's a couple ways to get rid of this little box. I would say this is one of the first things you look for when you export your data in Excel is these little green boxes because it will cause a ton of problems down the line. The first way is similar to where I showed you before if we go text to columns. It doesn't really matter if you pick delimited or fixed width, but you do want to unselect tab just in case there are tabs. And basically we can progress through this wizard. And then we want to have general selected. And what this basically tells Excel is if you see a number, I want you to acknowledge it as a number. If you see a date, I want you to acknowledge it as a date. And if I click finish, you'll notice that all of those green boxes have now disappeared, and these are all registered as numbers. Another solution is to do a function. We can add a new column here. And we can all we have to do is just click value equals our cell. Again, that's telling Excel to acknowledge this cell as a number. And again, we get rid of our little green boxes. If I double click this green box, it'll copy it all the way down. The next option, which is a little bit different and a little more steps involved, so maybe not the easiest or the quickest solution, but I'm going to type 1 into a cell that's not occupied. I'm going to select my cell and then press Control C. I'm then going to select my column. So a quick shortcut, which is not listed on your paper, if you wanted to select your whole column without having to click and drag all the way down or click to where you select data not within your data sheet. If I click on my first row here, all you need to press is Control, Shift, and down arrow, and that will tell Excel to highlight all cells within my table that have data. What I'm going to do now is right click and press Paste Special. I'm then going to multiply by that one number that I selected earlier and press OK. And once again, you see here, all my values are now numbers again. Again, this one's a little bit more step involved than the other two, but it's another option for you to convert your numbers. The final option is to highlight our entire data sheet. Once you do that, you will see this little exclamation point pop up. Again, it is Excel letting you know that he thinks they're seeing an error with numbers being stored as text. All I simply do is convert to number, and again, we get rid of our boxes. So if you'd like to take a second to convert that column to a number using one of those methods, and if you have questions, let me know. Again, just to clarify, this whole number and text really becomes a problem when we're trying to do different functions. So VLOOKUP, for example, if you don't have those registers and numbers for VLOOKUP, you will receive errors or will not match correctly using VLOOKUP. So it's important to make sure to look for those little green boxes and get rid of them before you start really cleaning. Okay, we're gonna move on next to highlighting and removing duplicates. This again is very useful for survey-based data. Is if for some reason a participant has multiple responses, or if there is a data entry error and there's multiple data entry points for one person. So what we're gonna do first is highlight duplicates. So once again, I'm gonna highlight the column that I suspect, or you want to highlight where you can find the duplicate. So ID number is usually a good place to start. Name is also a good place. But what we're going to do is ID number. Again, I'm going to highlight using Control Shift down. Then if I'm on the Home tab here, I'm going to select Conditional Formatting. Then highlight Cell Rules. And then I'm going to say Duplicate Values. Again, for me, this is useful to see where my duplicates are, to maybe go back and try to figure out where a data entry error might have occurred or why there's duplicates. Or if there is duplicates, which one is the actual data I want to use. So now that we've acknowledged where our duplicates are, we can remove them. That's pretty simple. All you're going to do is, again, highlight my column. We're going to go over to Data and then select Remove Duplicates. Once you do that, a wizard is going to pop up. It's going to ask you what criteria do you want to match to see if there are duplicates. I usually will unselect all and then select the one that I'm using. So in this case, ID number. Click OK. It'll then tell you that 258 duplicates were removed and there are 9,741 unique values remaining. So typically before, what I would do is just use the remove duplicates. But what I would want to know is, why are those 254 being removed and why are they duplicates? What happened? So it's a good way to highlight them to kind of backtrack and see where exactly these errors are coming from. So if you'd like to take a second to find your duplicates and remove them. And if there's any questions, I will take them now. Fantastic. So I'm noticing on my sheet that I left out more detailed information about the text to columns function. So I'm going to jump on that real quick now. So as I mentioned before, or as we saw before with text to columns, there's two options that we can use: delimited with or fixed with. If I use delimited, I can basically tell Excel, if you see a space, if you see a comma, if you see a $sign, I want you to split the cell at that point. They give you a few options here, but you can also enter any symbol that you want. I'm going to use space, even though this doesn't make sense to separate college and degree. I'm just doing it to show y'all. What you do notice is the title column has more than one word. So based on that, every space, or more than one space, every space is going to create its own column. So just be aware that as you do this, and we can see here it's separated. Again, doesn't make sense to separate that, but it's just an option for you to do. I use this often when I need to, or I've had instances to where sometimes I've gotten data sheets where all of the rows are combined. or all the columns are combined, I've got to separate it based using text to columns. It's also helpful to split any data that you need, or if you're combining data, text to columns is a good way to split it and then recombine it depending on what you're using. As I showed y'all before with text to column, you can also tell it based on certain amount of characters to create that separation, which is used here. Okay. Next, since we're pretty much clean for the most part, there's still some things we could do. I'm going to move on to coding. So coding, as we saw before, you can simply do find and replace. That's an easy way to do it if you already know your codes. However, it can get a little tedious if your code book is long, especially if you have some with 15 different options and then another with 20. It gets really long to type in each one individually. So there's a couple different methods you can use to code data. The first one I'm going to show you is called an if function. What this does is it tells Excel that if you see a certain value within a cell, I want you to return either a word or a code if it's true or if it's false. So if you see on your worksheet, if you're looking at if function on coding number 5 under B, the basic premise of the if function is if, and you open parentheses, data is equal to a certain criteria, what should be returned if true versus what should be returned if false. I'll show you on here. It's this right here. That's the basic premise of the function. So what we're going to do with it for this data sheet is I want to code annual salary. And I either want to code it as upper or lower, or high or low, which you can see here in the code book. This might not be technically accurate, but I'm just using it as an example. So what I basically want to do is I want to code anything that's above $90,000 as high, anything below $90,000 as low. What I could do is sort this from least to greatest and then code this way. However, that takes time. You could also have an error. So it's not always the best solution to go with. What I'm going to do instead is create an if function. So in this cell over here, let me put it right next to it so we don't lose track of it. I'm going to enter equals if, I'm going to open parentheses. I'm then going to select my data that I want to compare this criteria to. So in this instance, my data is in H2. And then I'm going to tell Excel, what about H2? What do I need to know? So for this, again, 90,000. So if H2 is above 90,000, I want you to say that it's upper, or I'm sorry, high. If it's false, I want you to say that it's low. And then I'm going to close parentheses. And I'll click enter. Now you'll see 0 is below 90,000, therefore it coded it as low. As before, if I double click my green box, it will code the entire data sheet. And if we would do a quick hand check, we can see all of these are below 90,000, so they're coded correctly. All of these are above 90,000 and they're coded correctly as well. Pretty simple. Now we can make it even more complicated though, if we have more than 2 options. So say we wanted to look at a high, a low, and a middle. So the premise of the if function is the same. We're just going to add a new if function for the new class. So here's what it would look like. So let's do if 90,000, we'll say I. Now that's just for that criteria. What I'm going to do now is create a new if function. Select my cell again, it's going to be H2. Now let's say if it's greater than 60,000, we'll say middle. And then now one last if function. And let's say 30,000. And we'll go low. Now I need to close all three parentheses that I opened and press enter. So you'll notice we have a new value here, false. What this is telling me that it does not meet the criteria in any of this if function. So it is not greater than 90, it is not greater than 60, nor is it greater than 30, i.e. it's less than 30. So if we wanted to, we can add another if function to this. And let's say if let's say greater than 0. And then we'll do really low. Close them all. Still false. I'm not sure why we're getting still false. Oh, there it is. You can see now that we have really low for anything above or between 0 and 30. Low is 30 and 60. Middle is 60 and 90, and etc. So what we can do from here is go ahead and code these based on your code book or leave them as is. Another option we can do to code is use VLOOKUP. This is probably my favorite function in Excel, and I use it pretty often. But what we're going to do is again use a function, and I'm going to tell Excel to look for a certain value within a table. And if you find that value, I want you to return another value. If you look on your cheat sheet, you will see this is the premise of what the equation looks like. We can either enter that into Excel or there's a wizard we can use. I will show you both ways. So the wizard is a lot easier. If we go to more functions up here and VLOOKUP. So there's basically 4 criteria with VLOOKUP that we have to satisfy. The first is what are we looking up? That typically is what you're trying to code. So in this instance, in the worksheet, I want you to code columns Q and R, which is what's your highest level degree, and then what is your gender. So I'm going to look up master's degree. Table array, again, is where do we want to find this value? And if we find this value in this table, what do you want me to return back to you? So for this, I will go to the code book. And since we're looking at highest level of education, I'm going to highlight my table here. So it's telling Excel I want to find master's degree within this table. The last thing I want to know is column index number. So if I find master's degree, what do you want me to return back to you? When you're looking at tables, the first column, so A is column 1, B is column 2, C is column 3, etc. So for this instance, I want to code it as 3. So I want you to return column 2. The last thing we're looking at is, do you want me to find, or range lookup? It's asking, do you want me to find a value that's close to what we're looking up or the exact value that we're looking up? I always do exact. You always want to do exact when you're coding, or if you're looking for a specific value. True can sometimes be misleading. So I always say false. And if we click OK, I get returned the number 3. If we look at my code book, we see master's degree is coded as 3, master's degree coded as 3. If I click and drag all the way down, we have my formula. Now you'll see there's issues here where we're not matching. This again goes to, there might be extra spaces in here, or the master's degree does not match up with what is provided in the code book. I'm actually not sure why it's doing this. I did this right before this class and it did not do that. Oh, I know exactly why it's doing it. Okay. Another thing to make note of when you're doing coding in Excel, you might have noticed when you're entering cells or entering, cells. Sometimes when you do Excel, you'll see these $ pop up within your cell. What those $ basically mean is it is locking that cell position in place. If I don't lock it, if you notice, as I progress, the cells that I'm looking up changes as I copy my formula all the way down. So for the first one, it goes from A6 to B11, then we go to A7 to B12, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're going to want to do is add $ symbols to lock those cells in place. Now, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can simply put a $ symbol before the A, a $ symbol before the 6, and we're good to go. Or if you want a little bit of a streamlined way, all you need to do is hover over the cell, click F4, and it automatically locks it in place for you. Over B11, F4, we're locked into B11. I click enter, I drag all the way down, and now we're actually coded correctly. These NAs, they don't have a college, or they don't have any criteria that matches, so they're NAs. Does everyone see how I did that? So I'm going to give y'all a moment to play around with the if functions and the VLOOKUP. There also is HLOOKUP. HLOOKUP is basically the same thing, except it's going horizontal. There's also a new feature in Office 365 called XLOOKUP. XLOOKUP I'm not too familiar with. I haven't used it a ton, so I can't really answer any questions on those. But VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP I'm pretty familiar with. Any questions on VLOOKUP or if function? Okay, now another useful tool for VLOOKUP is when you're trying to combine data sheets. Again, something might happen with REDCap, something might happen when you're sent data to where you'll have 2 separate data sheets with the same patients and you're trying to match them. Now, what you could do if they have ID numbers is simply sort it smallest to greatest, and then hopefully you get lucky and there's the exact same number and then match them that way. However, what often happens is you don't always have the exact number of rows. Some people are missing data. It becomes a lot more complicated than that. So we can use VLOOKUP to combine data sheets. So for this one, what we're going to do is utilize the manager survey stats sheet as well as the VLOOKUP sheet to the right of it here. In this VLOOKUP sheet, we have two different data points: how many professional years of work experience you have overall, and how many years of experience you have in your field. I want to add this to my master data sheet. What is consistent between the two data sheets is the ID number. So I'm going to use that as my criteria to match these two data sheets up. So similar to what we did before, we're going to go to VLOOKUP, or we could do the enter in the function itself as well. I would suggest using the wizard until you become comfortable with VLOOKUP, because it does become confusing just trying to enter it like an if function. So as I said before, ID number is what's consistent between these two. I'm going to match it based on ID number. We're then going to look for this ID number in this table. We then want to return the second column. We already know ID number is going to match. So we want to know how many years of experience within the field and how many years of experience at their profession. Again, I'm going to click false because I want an exact match, not an approximate match, and then click enter. Before we click and drag, we want to make sure that our cells are locked. Oops, don't want to do that. And then we're going to click and drag. So this gives us our professional work experience. But now we also have to do it again for years of experience in your field. What you could do is do your wizard again and enter your formula. Or what I like to do is pretty simple. If you just copy and paste your formula over here and change this to 3, it now grabs the next column over in your VLOOKUP. So it automatically matches to the next data point that we're looking for. Once again, once I have this copied, I usually will paste just to make sure there's no issues if I change this data sheet or if I delete cells. Any question on combining sheets with VLOOKUP? Awesome. Next, this is again probably more on the lines of cleaning as opposed to coding. This is simply combining cells. So say, for example, you had city and state and you wanted to combine them into one. That's a method you use it for. Or you could use it to combine first and last name, whatever you would want. There's a couple ways to do this. Both of them are functions. The first, if you look on your sheet, is equal cell and cell. Now what that looks like. So again, if I'm trying to combine city and state, this again probably won't look the greatest because not all of these are US cities, but we'll do it just for the example. I'm going to click enter. Then I'm going to select what cell I want to use. So we're going to go city first. I'm going to use P. Then I'm going to insert an and symbol or ampersand. Then I'm going to do a we're going to do a comma. No, a double quotation marks. Now, once you open these quotation marks, you can tell Excel if you want a certain symbol in between your words. If you put a space, I'll put a space. If you want to put a comma, put a comma. So what I'm going to do for this one is a comma and then a space. I'm going to close my quotation marks, add another ampersand, and then I'm going to select the second cell that I will be combining. O2. I got to add parentheses here. And now once I do that, you'll notice that these two cells are combined. And not only are they combined, but now I have a space and a comma in between my two words. If I wanted to, I could change this to a 2 and a space. And now we have a 2 and a space. Once again, if I double click, or I got to lock, or no, I don't actually. Double click all the way down. And it fills it all the way for all my data. Now, the other way we can do it is through concatenate, if I'm saying that right. I'm sure I'm not. And this is the similar premise to what we did before. And so where we're going to select our cell, but this time we're going to add a comma, and then our quotations again of what we want in between, followed by a comma, and the second cell that we're using. And then we can close, and once again, we're combined that way as well. The first way probably has less typing or more typing. This way, less typing, but each way provides similar results. I'm a little pressed for time, so I'm going to go through the last couple things. Columns to rows and rows to column. This one's pretty simple. All you're going to use is the transpose feature. So if I select my data, I copy, and if I use the transpose worksheet on my Excel sheet, if you right click and paste special and transpose, what this is going to do is change your columns to rows and rows to columns. This isn't a very useful thing to do with this data sheet, but if you ever have an issue to where your exports can come out flipped, you can use this feature to fix them. Two more things. Another one is the use of proper case function. This one is used in case if for some reason you have words that are all in capital or certain words are not capitalized at the beginning of the word. You can use the proper function to fix that. So let me just show you this one, for example. So Kentucky is supposed to be capitalized. If I type in equals proper and then the cell, it'll now capitalize that K in Kentucky for me. The last thing. So this is maybe a personal problem for me, but I just found this out kind of recently and it's been pretty helpful for me. But whenever I try to do like length of stay and stuff like that on REDCap, whenever I export it Excel, it always gives me a weird number and it's hard to understand what that means. So for example, let me give you an example. So 10:15 a.m., let's say. Sometimes when I export it, or when I export it, it'll show up as 10.25 in Excel. So numbers wise, it's 10.25. If we're thinking time wise, 1015 is 10.25. But it doesn't always look like that, so it's confusing. So for me, it takes a while to understand what am I exactly looking at and what is 10.25 in numbers or in time. So what I've found out or found online is if you just take this cell and divide it by 24 and then convert this cell back to time, it gives you your actual time. Just a little extra tidbit if you're working with time data. So that's all I have. I don't think we have a ton of time left to do the worksheet or work on your own. However, if you would like, you're more than welcome to work on your own. And then when we have our meeting with Andy and R in a month, we can circle back to any issues you had with Excel